and throughout Parliament buildings. We're good? Okay.
Yeah, good.
At this stage we'll move to item number 2, members, which is apologies, which we have none. We have a full attendance. Moving to item 3, declarations of interest. Any members, any relevant interests they wish to declare? If not, I'll move to item 4, which is chairperson's business. Firstly, departmental audits. In this week's written answers, the Minister advises on an audit of childcare training pathways in higher education and further education, an audit of energy skills in support of the delivery of the energy strategy, and an evaluation of Skill Up. If members are content to write to the department seeking the terms of reference, the timescale for publication and site of the associated reports as soon as they are available. Members are content with that. Only other item is just to thank each and every member for their contribution at yesterday's debate. I think we had contribution from all members of the Economy Committee, all of whom were speaking with one voice, which I think is the best way to approach these issues, and I think showed a clear partnership and desire from all members to work together to move forward our economy and ensure that all sections of our community benefit from a good economy. So from my perspective, can I just pay tribute to each and every one of you for your contributions yesterday. Draft minutes then, members, you'll see that draft minutes are on a page 644 of their packs from the 28th of February, and I'm asking if members are content that they are a true and accurate reflection of that meeting.
Yep.
Members are content. Matters arising. Does any member wish to raise any matter arising from the minutes of last week? If not, then we will move to item 7, departmental oral briefing on the Utility Regulator Bill. We should advise committee that we will now receive an oral and written briefing from the Department for the Economy on the Utility Regulator Support for Decarbonisation Preparation Bill, and refer members to the clerk's covering note at page 662. I also refer you to page 666 for the Energy Group brief, page 670 for the Energy Strategy, and page 737 for the Utility Regulator's Annual Report. Good morning. How are you?
Thank you.
Good, good. Okay, you're both very welcome. Sarah Brady, Director, Energy Operations, Department for the Economy, and Lindsay Hubbard, hopefully I pronounced your name correct. Perfect, no problem at all. Energy Legislation, Department for the Economy. We're very pleased to welcome you here to the committee, and I know the committee look forward to working with you for the remainder of the mandate. If you're content, I'll hand over to you to give oral briefing, and then I'll open up to members if there's any questions, if you're content with that approach.
First of all, thank you very much to the committee for allowing us to come here today, just to provide you with an initial insight into the work that the department is currently doing with the Utility Regulator in respect of their role in protecting energy consumers through energy transition. My name's Sarah Brady, as has been said, and this is Lindsay Hubbard, my colleague. I have 25 years experience in energy, mostly with the Utility Regulator, but more latterly as Director of Operations within Energy Group in the department. And Lindsay has 12 years experience in energy, initially with NIE, but for the last number of years with the Department for the Economy. The Utility Regulator, as you probably know, is the key independent body. It's the independent economic regulator responsible for regulating the electricity, gas and water industries in Northern Ireland. And as such, it has a key role to play in supporting the Department for the Economy as we work on energy transition and as we deliver the Executive's energy strategy, the path to net zero. And also, it has a key role to play in delivering on key Climate Change Act for Northern Ireland 2022 targets. The Utility Regulator is currently slightly hampered in its ability to play its full strategic role that it can play, and the reason is that its legislation hasn't been updated to reflect the importance of the Climate Change Act 2022. Recently we have been working with the Utility Regulator in order to try and identify and understand any gaps that are emerging as we work through and identify the new world we're moving into and new technologies. And we've identified a couple of key new and emerging areas where we feel the Utility Regulator has a role to play, where we need to let them in. And these include offshore renewables beyond the 12-mile mark, heat policy beyond natural gas and beyond electric heating, green hydrogen, and new technologies and new system services. We have identified that any legislative change we bring forward should focus on the interim to allow the utility regulator to engage immediately in all work relating to what the department needs to do under the Climate Change Act. And it's in that context that we are coming to the committee today to give you an informal preview, in a sense, to what's coming next, which will be a full consultation and then the normal process through the executive and the assembly of potential legislative change. The consultation that we do will seek views on a legislative solution to providing the utility regulator with a role in providing advice, guidance and support to the Department for the Economy in relation to our objectives and our duties under the Climate Change Act. I hope the written briefing that we've provided gives you some indication and some information, and I hope the verbal introduction that I've just given provides you with some help, and I'm very, very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Right, perfect. Thank you very much for that. When will the consultation open?
The consultation will open as soon as possible. The current draft has gone back to the Office of Legislative Counsel for some minor amendments to some of the wording, and as soon as that comes back, we would plan that the consultation will go out as soon as possible.
Okay, and just run me through again. So, what will exactly be in this legislation? So,
it will be very, very short. It'll not go into the specifics of the different types of technologies for the future. What it will simply say is that the utility regulator will have a duty to provide assistance, advice and support where it's needed to the department in respect of what we need to do for the Climate Change Act 2022.
And will the department be seeking accelerated passage on that bill?
We haven't decided on that yet.
And do you think you may decide?
Well, depending on what comes back in the consultation, if that we could consider that after the consultation.
Okay, and then just finally for me, in terms of financial costs associated with the bill, in terms of, I assume this will increase the staffing level at the utility regulator?
The utility regulator has provided some initial estimates. They estimated that over and above their existing complement, that they would need to find an additional 5 staff. They have said that moving forward into the future, it would very much depend on how the technology emerges and potentially more being asked for them. And they've noted that they are an independent body. They don't actually answer to the Department for the Economy. And as regards their budget and their resources, they deal directly with the Department of Finance.
Perfect, no problem. Philip?
Thank you. Thanks very much. I mean, just given that the utility regulator works closely or in partnership with the regulatory body in the south in terms of the All-Ireland electricity wholesale market, what conversations are taking place with regard to this bill with the regulatory authorities in the south and making sure that this is all kind of all-island proof with regard to the electricity market in particular?
The wholesale market element of it is slightly different in that the utility regulator works as part of the SEM committee overseeing the wholesale market, and because of that, the SEM committee is actually separately identified in the Climate Change Act as being able to provide advice, assistance and support. Those aren't the exact words, but the SEM committee is identified in the Climate Change Act already, so that can already be done as regards electricity and the electricity market.
Okay, and then the other, I suppose, important point. Climate Act is very important in terms of saving our planet and the drive towards net zero. But from a consumer point of view, electricity or energy prices are vitally important. So, is there anything with regard to the potential of this bill that will ensure that there's greater control over volatile energy prices for consumers?
We've all seen over the past number of years the susceptibility of Northern Ireland to vast shifts in world energy prices with the war in Ukraine and with COVID and all the rest of it, and that has resulted in big changes in energy prices in bills to consumers. And the whole thrust of energy strategy is to make Northern Ireland self-sufficient in renewable, affordable renewable energy that we can produce locally, and therefore break the link with those mad fluctuations in world prices and help the customer to secure affordable and environmentally sustainable long-term energy supplies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Mike?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. You're very welcome. As I understand it, the utility regulator takes the place of competition. Yeah? And you're asking for our support because you've developed legislative gaps because of emerging issues such as climate change. Mm-hmm. Are you giving any thought to this legislation being future-proofed so that you wouldn't have to come back next time there's a development?
That is the focus of the legislation. It's very short and it's very high level, and it is that the utility regulator provide advice, assistance and support where it's related to our Climate Change Act goals. When you get into the specifics and specific industries or specific technologies or any new regulations that might be needed as technologies arise in the future, well, they'll be dealt with then. But the point of this is that the utility regulator can be at the table and can bring their expertise and bring their brains right from the start. You know, even before you have the detail of the exact regulatory framework that you might put in place for a new piece of technology that comes forward in the future.
So if there is new technology, you will still be coming to the committee and we will get an opportunity to scrutinise what's going on. So that would be the best governance, I would suggest. Yes,
that's exactly right. So any sort of detailed legislation for a particular piece of technology, that it emerges that we consider necessary to legislate for, it'll be the normal process.
And when you say this will allow the regulator to have a seat at the table, does that not happen at the moment?
It does happen at the moment, but this is... It does happen at the moment, but I think what we're looking at now is a step change in the level of engagement that we're asking the utility regulator for, and that going forward it's much more significant because we're in such a changing world, and what this represents is a recognition that it's a step change.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Sinead?
Thank you. It's probably just leading on from Mike's question. So is the vision that the utility regulator will have an advisory role cross-cutting other departments in advising other departments in relation to decarbonisation? Is that what you're saying?
What this is about is about the utility regulator's role in advising the Department for the Economy. Yeah. If other departments need to bring something forward, if they feel they need to bring something forward, that might be different. But what this is about the Department for the Economy's role. Now, the nature of the net zero journey is such that it is cross-cutting, that it is cross all the departments. Everybody has a role to play. Transport, water, and you name it. And we do all work together and we do all come together, but it is really focusing on what we need to do in the department. And a lot of it is intertwined. For example, electric vehicles, the utility regulator is already in there in the conversations because of its impact on the electricity grid. So, they already do work, but this is a step change in the amount of work that they will be called upon to do and allowing them to make that step change.
And then just another small question. Obviously, the cost impact, and it's in the report and the staffing up levels, and that where are you getting the money in order to make sure that the utility regulator has the resources required for this step change?
Currently, the utility regulator has a number of different sources of where they can get their finances from. They have told us that they will be able to get it from licence holders who are then funded by customers. They are an independent body, so that is what they have told us. And as that is what they have told us, we will then give that to the Department for Finance, and the Utility Regulator will deal directly with the Department of Finance. And if the Utility Regulator, if the Utility Regulator can't finance anything from licence fees, it will then be up to the Utility Regulator to deal with the Department of Finance, and the Department for the Economy won't actually have a role, and the Utility Regulator can then deal with the Department of Finance in terms of its role in ensuring that whatever resources the Utility Regulator needs, it can get, and that conversation will be with the Utility Regulator and the Department of Finance.
Right, and then this is just, it's not on subject, but it is in a way. During the cost of living crisis, obviously the price of oil just skyrocketed. There was no regulation in and around that, and it seemed to be a gap in the remit of the Utility Regulator. Have you looked at that in any way in relation to the current legislation?
The whole point of energy strategy is that
Moving away.
oil won't be there anymore. Won't be there anymore, and all of the consumers in Northern Ireland will have access to local, sustainable, properly priced energy supplies, and that is the journey that we're on with the Utility Regulator, and that's why we want them to be.
But unfortunately, the reality is oil is there, and it's the predominant energy within my constituency in terms of heating, and yet there's no regulation around it. And we found that, and I know I've spoken to the Utility Regulator many times about it. You know, at that point when prices were rocketing, it was very, very difficult to get some control in the system and to support. Now, we brought many of the providers around the table here in this building, but again, without that utility regulation, it was a very, very difficult fight that we were fighting, and it could be something that we could maybe future-proof, but I'm just throwing that out there. It's not in this current legislation, I assume. Okay.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, just checking, Chair, that you can hear me okay.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Folks, apologies. I'm just back from the junior doctor strike, so I'm online this morning. It was just to check with you firstly and to concur with Sinead's point as well. I think in our constituency, huge numbers of people are using oil. Unfortunately, that does, the fact that it's unregulated impacts everybody, but it impacts most profoundly people who are on the lowest incomes. So that's something that we've continuously found. I appreciate obviously the fact that we are now in a stage where we're trying to move away from oil, but as Sinead has stated, the current reality is that many households are using oil, and quite often the households who are in extreme poverty and who are in acute fuel poverty are using oil as well. I'm looking just at figures last night just around this, and I see that it hasn't dropped below £300 for 500 litres since last July. I'm just wondering on that, is there any opportunity that I suppose while we're trying to phase that out, and like you've done for gas, like you've done for electricity, is there any plan to cap oil prices or any ability to cap oil prices in that way?
Not at the minute that I'm aware of, within my team anyway. We are pretty focused on replacing oil and working with the Utility Regulator. We also work closely with the Department for Communities in relation to their fuel poverty strategy, and we're looking very much at things like energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is very much at the forefront of what we're doing. We put an extra £1 million into the NICEP, the Northern Ireland Sustainable Energy Programme. We're hoping that we can put more in to make homes all across Northern Ireland as energy efficient as possible, so that if you are on oil, you're at the very least you're using less of it, and that saves you money, and that saves you money for as long as you've got the energy efficiency measure in your house. So that's really the focus on using less of it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and appreciate that. But would there be an ability, I suppose theoretically, to amend this and to introduce a cap on oil, because it is still the predominant use, certainly within my constituency?
This what we're working on now is purely about providing advice, assistance, and support. It's not about the Utility Regulator regulating or taking decisions in any of the new industries. It's about them having a seat at the table and engaging and providing advice, assistance and support. So what that advice, assistance and support will look like, the utility regulator, an independent body, and it'll be up to them what they want to bring for, we will be asking them for advice, and then they will be coming forward, and what that advice looks like will be, they're an independent body and it will be their independence.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Just a second question, Chair, and it's just a quick one around paper bills. We've got quite a number of elderly constituents who have contacted us really around the fact that most payments and most accounts now are online, and just to check around the fact that some people are obviously still preferring paper bills. Would you be able to confirm if there is any companies which you're aware of who there's a price difference when people are going for paper bill rather than for an online bill?
I know that the utility regulator has a billing code of practice, so that all supply licence holders have to comply with the utility regulator's billing code of practice. I think the utility regulator are up separately, and they might be able to provide more detail than me on the exact nature and content of the billing code of practice.
That's great. I'll certainly ask them that, and thanks for your answers today. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Saoirse?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming this morning. I suppose in terms of just trying to step it back a wee bit, this is about enabling legislative change to allow a bigger voice in terms of going forward of meeting the climate targets from the ER's perspective. Is that right? Yeah. So that's obviously with the WLC at the minute, as you have said. In terms of actually getting this done, how essential do you think this is to lock this legislative change down now to enable us to do that job of work so that we can actually have delivery of the first climate budgets?
The utility regulator is an essential strategic partner, and allowing them to make a step change in the level of engagement that they've so far been able to do, we think is vitally important in all sorts of areas, particularly the ones I've mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So you've said step change a number of times in the staffing levels. Sinead and I think Mike have already talked about the money, and then there was a conversation about DOF and how that would work if they couldn't generate the money from the licence holders. So if that situation does come to pass, did I pick that up correctly, that DFE don't actually have a role there? That's up to the utility regulator in their own right to go to DOF to try and make the case should they not be able to raise that money?
That's correct.
Okay.
The Department for the Economy, the utility regulator is an independent body. They answer directly to the Assembly. The Department for the Economy don't have a role in setting the utility regulator's budget at all. If the utility regulator needs extra money, and when the utility regulator sets its budget, it goes to the Department for Finance. So in terms of answering questions as to how this step change will be financed, that will be for the utility regulator and the Department of Finance.
Do we have sight of that yet?
As I say, the utility regulator has provided an initial estimate of an additional 5 full-time employees on top of their existing complement that they have today. After that, it will very much depend on the new and emerging technology and what that turns out to be.
So are we thinking that there could be a situation where actually it requires more than that 5 then? Should there be a much quicker pace and a wider scale?
If it requires more than that, it will be for the utility regulator as an independent body to go to the Department of Finance, agree their budget with the Department of Finance, and agree with the Department of Finance that they're able to fund it, and the Department for the Economy won't have a role in how the utility regulator funds its activity.
Okay, just one last one as well. When do you think we'll be seeing a wider energy bill?
We have been doing a lot of work across a number of areas, including the ones that I read today, and our current thinking is that we should use existing regulations and existing legislation where we can, secondary legislation or secondary regulations where we can, and we can do them quickly. And when we look forward rather than having a big all singing, all dancing, hold everything until it's in a full energy bill with everything in it. We should take things in bite-sized chunks and bring them forward as and when they're needed to be brought forward. So, for example, we might bring things forward at different stages, which is what we're doing now, in order to bring the utility regulator in early.
So it could, rather than like an omnibus bill, you're saying it could be just as and when, in order to try and reflect the urgency of us probably having a chance to meet.
Yes.
Grand, okay, thank you.
David.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah and Lizzie, for coming down to us. I just want to go back a little bit and tease something out, and this is I'm kind of new into this brief as well, so I'm just getting my own head around the energy piece, which isn't my background. But whenever I looked at, I was reading through, and you looked at, I'm just trying to tease out the role of the regulator, but you looked at this remarkable differential between poverty rates across the UK, and if you look, is that to do, and between fuel poverty rates within the UK, and it pricked my interest. Is that to do with how those are calculated, or is this back to oil for?
Well, there are three elements to fuel poverty. One's the energy efficiency rating of the property you live in. And how much energy you actually have to buy to be warm. One is the price you pay for the energy you're using, and the other one is your income. And all three of those elements go into determining whether or not you're in fuel poverty. Yeah. And that's very important. And the utility regulator, currently the utility regulator's primary duty is to protect consumers. And it does so, protect consumers in electricity and gas and water. And it does so by pursuing its duties in such a way as it has due regard for a number of secondary duties. And one of those secondary duties is to have due regard for vulnerable consumers. Another one of those secondary duties, when it's doing its job and doing its duties, is to have due regard for secure, affordable, reliable, long-term energy supplies that are environmentally sustainable. And environmentally sustainable takes account of low carbon. How the utility regulator balances and does that it's an independent body. It's a matter for itself, I guess. But it is a partnership approach. We work with the Department for Communities. The Department for Communities have a really big role to play in the journey to net zero, and they have they work on their fuel poverty strategy, and that's a partnership approach as well.
Okay, so the three elements, that's really good to understand that. So the three elements are basically salary, the building, or and in the middle of the cost of the product. But if you how does that then explain that poverty rate is lower in Northern Ireland than the rest of the UK? The rates of
poverty rate?
No, not fuel poverty, but poverty as a whole. Is poverty rate, so poverty, if you Google and look through poverty rates in Northern Ireland, poverty rates are shown as lower. I don't believe it, but that's the stats that we're seeing. Yet fuel poverty rates are almost double in parts of the UK, and I don't get how that. I understand our salaries are lower, and I understand.
I am aware that there have been changes made elsewhere to the measurement and the way that fuel poverty is measured. I can't tell you the answer offhand if that's the reason. Okay. I can go away and look at it and talk to the Department for Communities and come back to you with a fuller answer if that's okay.
Yeah, 100%.
I do know that there have been various attempts to look at the way fuel poverty is measured across the, and I know it's different in different areas, but if it's okay, I'll go away and talk to the Department for Communities and come back with a fuller answer for you.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And just to finish off, whenever I was reading through it, I was just fascinated with figures, and I started looking at figures, going, this doesn't seem to add up, and there's it could be just the differential of how things are measured in different areas. But you said you pricked me interest a second ago as well with Podrick, and you said it was about advice and support. If that's the case for the regulator, what is the or exactly how does the regulator intersect then with the Consumer Council, and are people aware of the differences there, or what is, if it's advice and support, what is the Consumer Council's role, and how does that work?
I think it's about different levels of expertise and involvement and balance. I mean, the Consumer Council is there to speak for the consumer's voice, and the utility regulators are there to protect the consumer. But the utility regulator has this range of other things that it has to do and it has to balance. For example, it has to make sure that the licence holders can finance the activities that they're licensed to do, and that they can NIE, for example, and NI networks can finance running the energy system, and the utility regulator will have expertise in price controls and things like that, which the Consumer Council won't have. The Consumer Council will be looking at it purely from the consumer's point of view, and the utility regulator will be looking at this whole balance and the financing and the vulnerable customers and the lot, and how the utility regulator balances all of those different various things that it has to have due regard for in the pursuit of its primary objectives is it is an independent body, and it is a matter for the Utility Regulators Board to take decisions on, and how it balances, for example, the need to have due regard for vulnerable customers with the need to have due regard for secure, reliable and environmentally sustainable energy supplies, and the need to have due regard for licence holders' abilities to finance their activities. Is a matter of utility regulator skill. That's the technological skill that the utility regulator bring to it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Gary?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just to follow on, obviously this bill is very much a bridging of the gap effectively in terms of some of the new and emerging technologies and the advice and support that the utility regulator can and should provide. And I was interested just in terms of your comments in terms of the wider energy bill, in terms of how that you see that been brought forward in terms of bite-sized chunks as opposed to one overarching bill. So this particular bill that's going forward, do you envisage, and there's a consultation, we don't know yet when that's going to happen, it's going to happen soon, do you envisage then that there will be learning from this in terms of when the wider package comes forward, there will be learning, but also in terms of where there be gaps, the utility regulator is useful in terms of holding various organisations to account as well and almost calling out some of the failings, etc. Additional powers, is that something which will ultimately come as well in terms of, obviously there's advice and support, is there any additional powers that you envisage coming in the back of this?
Well, ultimately, for example, when the heat, when a regulatory regime for heat is ready and brought forward, we would envisage the utility regulator having a role. Legislation brought forward through Westminster already envisages that the utility regulator will have a role, but the detail, we will have a consultation on that and have a detail of the utility. We'll work out the detail of the utility regulator's role in areas such as heat and how that regulation will work, and then that will form part of later things that we bring back to the committee as and when they're ready, as and when we've had our consultations and our due process and we've got that detail written down.
Okay, and apologies for my naivety in this regard, but in terms of the actual powers of the utility regulator, in terms of the say for the Northern Ireland Assembly and the impact that obviously we could have in terms of scrutiny, etc., as a committee, what level is that for us here as an Assembly?
Sorry?
In terms of the powers and the additional powers that potentially the utility regulator could have, where does it come from?
The powers that the utility regulator have are also out in the statutes.
Yep.
So currently, the powers that the utility regulator has in electricity and gas are contained in the Energy Order for
Yes.
Northern Ireland. The powers that the utility regulator has in water are contained in the Water and Sewerage Order for Northern Ireland, and the decisions that they make and the framework within they take their decisions are laid out in those. And as I've said, they've got a primary duty in electricity to protect consumers, and they will balance present consumers and future consumers, and then within the pursuit of that primary duty they will have a range of other things they have to have due regard for, and they will answer directly to the Assembly. They don't answer to the Department for the Economy. They're an independent body. They answer directly to the Assembly for how they use those powers under the Gas Order, and under the Electricity Order, under the Energy Order, under the Water and Sewerage Order. Various different pieces of legislation that provide UR with the role. They will come and they will answer directly for themselves.
Thank you.
Then just finally from my perspective, so the Climate Act is obviously cross-cutting and requires action from all government departments. This legislation only enables the utility regulator to provide advice guidance to the Department for the Economy. Why not all government departments? Surely they have they all have an important role to play in that, and the more cross-cutting action that we have, and I think we all agree in this committee of the urgency to do that, but if the Department for the Economy is the only department enabled to discuss with the utility regulator, get advice, surely that hamstrings other departments?
Well, we as the Department of the Economy work in partnership with all the other departments, and when it comes to things like heat and electric vehicles, for example, the utility regulator's role in regulating the electricity industry and the electricity network, and they will come and give us their advice. And you know, the utility regulator, as it deals with all the other departments, I guess it'll speak to the other departments for itself, but how it's currently working is that we speak to them and they can speak to other departments themselves, but the step change really is with us, and that's why we brought it forward. Well, that's the work that we've identified with the utility regulator.
And would your view then be it would be for other departments to bring forward their own legislation if they wish to get that advice, guidance, etc. from the utility regulator?
It's a matter for them, I would say.
Yeah, it's just, you know, we're always conscious of silo working and government departments all focusing on their own particular issue and a lack of partnership approach, but as you say, you can only speak for your department, so no, totally understand that. And I know the committee will obviously be keen to hear directly from the utility regulator, although the department doesn't have a reporting role with the utility regulator. Obviously, if this bill is approved, there will be financial consequences for bill payers across Northern Ireland, so I think the committee will want to be sure of the action it takes before we pass on additional costs to our consumers and ultimately our constituents. But with that, can I thank you so much for your attendance here?
And we will
be in touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. No problem.
So next up, the normal legislative process then, and obviously being in contact with all the other departments and going through the normal process, including the Department of Finance, and then they'll speak directly to the utility regulator about resourcing.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you, both so much indeed.
Thank you.
Members, thank you for that. Clerk, is there any actions we need to summarise in the committee on that?
So, Chair, if I've understood correctly, I think the committee wants to hear from the utility regulator and schedule a written and oral briefing. Does the committee also want to write to the utility regulator actually about paper bills? The question that came from Mr. Delargy. And then also to the department about fuel poverty and poverty rates, comparing Northern Ireland with the rest of the UK, though that might be via Department for Communities. And is it the case the committee can play this anyway? You can wait for the consultation and make your comments then, or the committee could write to the department in the terms that the chair just set out there about suggesting maybe that the VIREs in question should be extended to promote the path to net zero across all departments, not just the Department for the Economy.
Yeah.
I think that was a point very well made by Philip, and I was trying to get through it myself with the cross-cutting aspect of it. I just don't see the logic in it. Maybe, you know, I'm missing something, but I just don't understand, because it is so essential to the workings within every department now, because, you know, decarbonisation and the Climate Change Act goes right through every single department.
I think, Chair, I agree with Sinead. I think you were absolutely spot on there, and obviously I'm jumping the gun here slightly because we will meet with the utility regulator, but I was just also sort of, Gary had brought this in as well about in terms of, you know, how it's actually funded and the role of DOF, and the fact that, you know, could there be a potential problem down the line with funding from the licence holders, and given the budgetary constraints that we have across all departments, where does that sit then, given what you've just said, Sinead, about the cross-cutting nature of it? So yeah, I think it would be worthwhile to understand just a wee bit more about not only the VARES but also the financing of it as well.
Members content with that approach?
Chair as well, just on what Pádraig and I raised oil. I know it's a different conversation, a different time. This is, but it is a real problem, particularly when we had the escalation of fuel prices, and there was just no regulation there. And there's kind of a monopoly nearly in and around oil as well, so they force their own prices well, that might be but there is, there's a number of key players there. Can we maybe tease that out as well and ask some questions in and around that?
The utility regulator.
Mm-hmm.
Chair, just as a member, I'm sure knows well, the Minister in Assembly written questions indicated he has no plans to regulate the oil industry, but you can ask the utility regulator what the ins and outs of that are.
Yes,
that's
please.
agreed, Chairperson.
Yes, okay. Members are all content with that. Okay, thank you very much. Moving then to item 8, Assembly Research Introductory Brief. The committee will now receive an oral and written introductory brief from the Assembly Research team. I'm delighted to welcome Eileen Reagan, Senior Research Officer, and Chris Rothwell, Research Officer, who will kindly provide us with a presentation. Eileen, are you going first, or maybe you're doing them all?
If it is okay,
of
yes,
course.
I will go first, Chair.
Sorry, Chair,
So
I think we're having a technical...
Oh.
Here we go.
Take out this plug, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep, this is the switch it off and on again. Here we go.
I'll give it a thump.
No, don't
We
worry.
tested it before and it was fine. Okay.
We did honestly test this morning and it was fine. Here we go.
Should be okay now. Fun and games. There we go. Okay. It's all in the order of which we turn on the plugs. We'll become more accustomed, so apologies. Thank you, Chair, for having us here today. I'm here to speak to you very briefly about what the Research and Information Service of the Assembly does. There's a lot of familiar faces around the table, and it's very nice to be back. I'm joined here with my colleague, Chris Rothwell, who's going to speak to you about an economic overview briefing paper. So, and forgive us because some of you are more or less familiar with ourselves. So I'm going to just quickly rattle through what is RAISE, the work of the library, the work of the research service, and then looking at some other RAISE initiatives that we do. The Assembly Secretariat structure you'll all be very familiar with. As you can see on the screen there, we're in the lower right-hand corner, the Research and Information Service. We sit within the Legal, Governance and Research Services Directorate. RAISE structure, its organizational structure, is up there on the screen for you. On the left side you can see there's library, and then as you move to the middle of the screen to the right are all the research teams. There's 4 research, there were 4 research teams, but now we're moving to 5 because there's been a bit of reorganization internally. John Power is the head of research, and myself and the people you see named on the screen are the senior researchers, and they're responsible for the research team's library, but also there's a new unit, the Knowledge Exchange unit, that's emerged. Okay, we have about approximately, including management and staff, 41 people. So, RAISE, we're here to provide confidential, independent, objective, accurate, evidence-informed, and non-partisan research and information products. And we do that, we provide to the MLAs in their plenary capacity, in their committee capacity, as well as in their constituency capacity. In addition to that, we have other users, which may be the Commission, the Assembly Commission itself, and there may be other, like Senior Secretariat, that we come involved with in supporting. We would work very regularly with our colleagues in the Bill Office, as well as in Engagement, Education Service, across the board, and obviously with our clerking colleagues regularly. Our role hopefully helps yourselves in your committee capacity, as well as in your 2 other capacities, to meet your unique research and information needs. So what this infographic is really just to try and tease out all that's expected of an MLA. Not an easy task, and in the current context, extremely challenging with the public finance battles that we face, as well as the fact that we've had 2 extended periods of interrupted devolution. So that's just trying to, that slide is actually used when I go out to academics to try and tease out for them the various bits that they can influence. So Assembly Library, feel free to drop in. The inquiry desk, it's just few doors down as you go through the double doors. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. There's vast resources there, and people are very happy to dig out information when you need it. And if it's something that goes beyond an information request, they will liaise with their research colleagues, and it'll just go to the right team so that you can get the right service, and hopefully that the service is timely as well. So we encourage you to engage with them. Something else to be aware of, screen's back, is the inquiry service that I mentioned there, where you can bring your queries. Be aware that there's information packs that do go out to the members, and they're available on Assist through the library. And a link, I understand, to the pack is emailed directly to MLAs, usually 2 Fridays before the debate. So these packs obviously concern private members' motions and selected committee motions. They can be really rich resource of information. Just to note, they aren't available to members of the public because there are copyright-related reasons for us not being able to do that. And they cover the gamut of information that is relevant and available for you to consider the issue before you concerning the motion. Encourage you to look at the RAISE web pages and also on the Assist as well. They're largely the same, and you can see the variety of services we offer. So the research service, on the slide you can see the range of services. There's analytical briefings, there's bill papers, there's statistical analysis, mapping analysis, so that you can see the geographic distribution of certain data across the jurisdiction of Northern Ireland. In addition to that, we occasionally identify expert external witnesses, less so in recent years. Specialist advisors may change going forward. There's commentary service. And more recently, there's been some very serious efforts made in the area of public finance scrutiny workshops that we've developed, and we're actually rolling out at the moment. There's a 5-module series. Some of you will have attended it already within certain committees. The chair, I know, has attended in finance. In addition to that, to enable and support the committees to better interrogate and exercise their advisory and scrutiny capacities, we do have an online departmental financial forecasting dashboard, and that takes the departmental outturn and forecast outturn data and try and give another evidence base to the committees to really look at the public finance decisions throughout the budget cycle. It's 4 distinct stages: during the formulation, during the approval stage of the budget, during the execution, as well as during audit. We also have some economic scrutiny workshops, Chair, that I understand the committee has commissioned and will be delivered in the near future to yourselves. And we also have a program on academic engagement. Some of you may be familiar with the Knowledge Exchange seminar series, and it includes a range of activities that we do in the area of knowledge exchange to support the members in their 3 capacities. So I identified a few types of products there on this slide in relation to the bill papers, the review of costings, so that there's some kind of understanding of the financial implications of bills, whether they be executive or private members' bills. There's research papers, or more of like a deep dive in an area. We do oral presentations like you'll see today Chris doing on an area that is of interest to the committee. The workshops I mentioned earlier, and then there's a range of other products online. Our blog, which does thematic articles of interest to MLAs, and as well there's constituency profiles. So we do encourage you to have a look around, as well as your staff and your parties, to encourage them. Most of our work is coming from the individual MLAs and the committees. If you would like to make library and research requests, you can go through the inquiry desk that I mentioned earlier. You can go through committee officials. Your staff as well, MLAs come to us directly. Never hesitate to talk to us when you see us as you become more familiar with our faces. Just to note, we don't provide written speeches for the MLAs or for the committees, and our outputs obviously aren't based on political opinion, political association, or opinion. It's all evidence informed. We don't do policy proposals, and we don't do lines of questioning. However, we do scrutiny points, which arise up out of the evidence that we point to when we produce our briefings. Just a reassurance that we don't disclose who the customer is. It's always confidential unless it's otherwise agreed with the customer. Okay. These are just given examples of the types of things that we do and the presentations we give. We encourage you to look at our sources online, because there's a lot more being done with online dashboards and infographics that basically provide you with a better evidence base. I mentioned the blog to you, the workshop series, infographics that we're doing, online dashboards, constituency profiles, and you have these slides if you would like to look at them. And one thing to highlight is in relation to the Knowledge Exchange Unit. The whole purpose of work in this area is about promoting evidence-led policy and lawmaking in Northern Ireland, and we want to nurture an applied research culture in the Northern Ireland. We had KES in the past. We haven't been able to run KES, the Knowledge Exchange Seminar Series, because we haven't had a program for government and we haven't been running. So we're very hopeful that we will get KES up and running. It's, for those that may be less familiar, KES is a unique partnership of all the 5 higher education institutions in Northern Ireland. There's no such thing across the European Union in Europe, and it was very successful when it ran. And as people may be aware, it partners the universities, RAISE, and the committee system. So the chair of the committee that is comes along and provides the opening remarks where the seminar is most relevant to that committee's remit. Mr. Nesbitt very kindly helped us out many a times giving the opening remarks at KES in the past. And several other MLAs did as well. We do capacity building workshops with academics so that we're getting more fit for purpose policy briefings coming from the academic community. We need more applied research so we have more evidence-informed policy and lawmaking. And there's various other initiatives in and around the knowledge exchange. One last thing to note is we're very pleased. We have United Kingdom Research and Innovation funded internships. So it means we're able to bring people in from the higher education institutions to try and bridge the gap between academia and the legislature. And more recently, we've actually received Research Council funding so that we can have a dedicated person in the research service, again, to try and bridge the gap. So keep an eye out. There'll be more things coming on that front. Thank you. Chris? I'll just bring up Chris's paper here.
Maybe at this point, just see if you're happy if anyone has any questions. Eileen, if that's possible. Philip?
Not really a question for Eileen.
Well, then we'll move up. No,
more for yourself, Chair.
Yeah.
I mean, the presentation's very interesting. The slides are very interesting. Is it possible that we could get the slides emailed separately from the pack so that we can save them rather than having to ever always look through the pack if we need that?
And I just, that's not a question, but just to say thanks to the team in there, and the service is absolutely first class, and we've never found it wanting at all in my office, and we've worked very closely with them many times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
And thank you for that. Can I just ask, and I welcome the partnership that you have with the higher education sector, particularly with KES, but as an economy committee, we're always keen to also fly the flag for our FE sector too, and I'm sure you do work with them, but I'm just wondering, have you looked at doing a similar partnership that we have with our universities and higher educational institutions, but also with our FE colleges too?
It's interesting that you raise that, and that would be something that we would like to think about in future. With the recent knowledge exchange post that's funded by UKRI, a part of that is looking at how you bridge better with the universities and the university colleges in the north. But that's the next piece of the puzzle, because FEs, what's coming out of FEs has changed enormously since KES first formed in 2011. So we're hopeful that we can pursue that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure I can put this paper on the screens, but if you're okay, I can still talk to the paper in the pack. I think it's page 831. So Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'd just like to briefly talk you through this paper that you have in your packs. It's an economic overview of Northern Ireland, and it covers two broad kind of categories. So there's some context at the start of the paper just around the work of the committee in the previous mandate, and also some policies of the department. But the two main sections of the paper I'm going to focus on are positives, so areas that Northern Ireland's economy has performed or is performing quite well in, but also some challenges too. So some immediate challenges, but also some longer term ones, some longer term issues as well. So I will start with the positives. These all draw on the most recently available data as of last Friday. So the positives for the Northern Ireland economy cover things like headline economic growth over the last 25 years, a number of labour market indicators, and the headline trades balance as well. So if I start with economic growth, at figure 1 in the paper, you'll see that Northern Ireland's economy has grown 38% since 1998 in real terms. In real terms, because that removes any effects of inflation or price rises over that time. So it's broadly kept pace with other parts of the United Kingdom, other devolved administrations, and the UK average. They've all been around 30-40% as well in that time. In terms of labour market indicators, so total employment has recovered quite well since the pandemic. You'll see in figure 2 that total employment is almost at its pre-pandemic levels again, although that headline figure does kind of mask some underlying trends as well. So total employment is made up of employee jobs, but also self-employment. So if we were to look just at employee jobs, as you'll see in figure 3, that's actually up quite a lot since the pandemic, by around 25,000. And yet total employment is still slightly below its pre-COVID level. And why that is that the level of self-employed has actually fallen quite a lot. It's more than offset the increase in employee jobs during that time. In terms of unemployment, so unemployment rates are actually very, very low at the moment in Northern Ireland, close to historic lows. So it's around 2.6% at the minute, compared to just over 4% in the UK. And that's a good thing, but it is also a consequence of the fact that there's very high economic inactivity in Northern Ireland. So the labour market here is divided into two sort of main groups. There's economically active, which includes people who are employed and unemployed, and there's economically inactive. So a decrease in unemployment might not necessarily mean an increase in employment. It may mean that people have left the labour force altogether and become economically inactive, and that is the case in Northern Ireland quite a lot of the time, which I will touch on shortly. In terms of overall trades performance, exports are now at a record high of just over £13 billion, which gives a surplus of around £3.5 billion. So that's the difference in exports over imports. Of that 13 billion in exports, around 10 of that, the majority of that is in goods, and the rest is in services. Okay, so the paper then moves on to talk about some of the challenges facing the economy, so some of the shorter term, more immediate pressures, but also longer term issues as well. So the first one we address is inflation. So the most common measure of inflation that we use is CPI, Consumer Price Index. So that takes around 700 goods, what's called a basket of goods, and looks at the average increase in their price over a period of time, a year. And whatever that percentage increase is over the year, then that's the inflation rate. So if that average price was £100 this time last year on £103 today, the inflation rate's 3%. And that's been very high over the last 18 months and peaked at over 11% in October 2022, which is very high for in recent contexts. So it has fallen again, continues to fall. It's now at 4%, but that is still slightly higher than the 2% target that the Bank of England, that most other central banks have set as a target for inflation. You can see in figure 6 of the paper, there are different components, different contributors to that level of inflation. So most recently, you'll see the biggest contributors are things like restaurants and hotels, food and drink, and recreation and culture. So the contributions to inflation obviously change over time. So if you looked at it, say a year ago, energy would have been the biggest one, most likely, energy costs. There are other measures of inflation aside from CPI. So there's a measure called core inflation, which takes out some of the more volatile elements. So things like energy, food and drink, and alcohol and tobacco. It's remained slightly higher. It's taken a little bit longer to come down, but it is coming down, and it's currently just around 5% now. And also, it is worth noting as well that inflation is a measure of the rate the price is increasing. So if, say, inflation has fallen from 5% to 4%, it doesn't mean its prices are falling, it just means they're still rising, but just slightly slower. Okay, so in terms of then some of the more long-term economic issues and economic challenges that we're facing, we'll move on to economic inactivity. This is a very long-running issue. You'll see in the chart there's a big gap between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom average. That chart goes back to 2010. If the chart went back further, the trend would look the same. The gap would still be pretty big. So it's around 27% in Northern Ireland versus around 20% in the United Kingdom. And that means that 27% of our economically active population, people between 16 and 64 years old, are classed as economically active, so they're not employed or unemployed. So why is it so high? There are different categories of inactivity and different reasons for inactivity. So it can be things like people who are retired, students, people who are caring for family members, or it can be because of long-term sickness or disability. And if you look at the percentage of inactivity that is accounted for by students in retirement, it's actually quite similar in Northern Ireland to the United Kingdom. It's the category of long-term sickness and disability that's actually quite a bit higher in Northern Ireland than it is elsewhere. So it's around 41% in Northern Ireland, it's around 30% in the United Kingdom, and it's that category that accounts for a lot of the difference between the UK and Northern Ireland. Okay, so another long-term issue for Northern Ireland's economy, another challenge, is productivity and the gap to other places. So we've looked at the gap to the United Kingdom. There's different measures of productivity. Whichever one of them you look at, there is a gap. But probably the most straightforward one to look at as an example is GDP per job. So if you had two economies with the same workforce, size of workforce, same number of employees, but one was more productive, the economy in that country is going to be bigger. It's going to have more GDP for every job that it has. So in Northern Ireland, the reason for that gap in GDP per job to the UK and other parts of the UK is really a combination of two things. So it can be down to the mixture of what sort of economic activity and sectors we have in the economy. So it might be more reliance on some lower productivity sectors relative to other places. But it also may be due to differences within sectors themselves. So say if you take hypothetically IT in Northern Ireland, the productivity within IT in Northern Ireland may be lower than the productivity in IT in other places like the United Kingdom. So it's a combination of what sectors we have and the productivity within those sectors too. Okay, and that can be, there can be a variety of different reasons for differences in productivity within sectors too. So it could be, differences in management performance, a lack of investment in things like skills or machinery or equipment. There's a number of different reasons. If we look next at labour supply, this is another long-term challenge, or potentially long-term challenge. So if we look at our labour supply, our potential workforce is essentially our population that's between 16 and 64. And our labour supply essentially can be, we've got an internal one and an external one. So we've got our internal potential workforce or working age population, and our external one is essentially migrants, working migrants coming to Northern Ireland. And for labour supply to keep pace with a growing economy and with increased employment, you need to rely on those two sources of your workforce, your potential workforce. So the reason this is listed as a challenge is that the first of those, the internal labour supply, your working age population is not really growing anymore, and it's probably going to contract. Actually, it's projected to contract from around 2030 onwards, and that's just a consequence of an ageing population. That means then that you have potentially more reliance then on an external labour supply, so migration. Inward migration slightly lower in recent years. It's hard to say what the projection of it's going to be, but if it were to follow the same trend and to not grow as much or to decline, then that would result in a pretty big limitation on the capacity of the economy to grow then, if you've got limited internal labour supply growth and limited external labour supply growth to provide labour for growing employment. And then finally, in terms of inclusion, so this is the last of the challenges that we've looked at in the paper, and inclusion really is the extent to which economic opportunities are fairly distributed in our society. So we've used a couple as an example, disability and deprivation. So if you look at employment rates for disabled people in Northern Ireland versus people who aren't disabled, there's a big gap. You can see in figure 12 of the paper, employment rates for people who are disabled here are just 37.3%, and that's much bigger gap than it is in other parts of the UK. So that's not just a common trend within the UK. It's a much bigger difference here than it is elsewhere. So if we were able to make improvements here or narrow or close that gap, or certainly close it slightly, that would have obviously economic benefits aside from social and health benefits too. Another example, another metric is the difference in employment rates then between some of Northern Ireland's most deprived areas and some of its least deprived areas. Again, there's a big difference. You can see in figure 13 of the paper, employment rates for least deprived areas in Northern Ireland are around 78%. They're just over 56% in the least deprived areas. Again, that's quite a big difference. So we've done sort of some illustrative examples in the paper of what it would look like for the economy and the workforce if you were to narrow the gap slightly or just even half it. But again, you can see that if you could certainly narrow that gap at all, it would have significant economic and social benefits to the economy. Okay, so I don't want to strike too negative a tone by going through so many challenges, but that kind of rounds out the two main sections of the paper. There certainly are a number of positives that are worth noting for the economy. I haven't listed them all, but that hopefully covers some of the major ones in where the economy is doing well, but also some of the sort of shorter term and longer term challenges that we're facing. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you for that. That was very useful indeed. I'll start with Padraig.
Thank you. And look, thank you both for the presentation. And just to echo what was said already, I've always found, any time that either myself or anybody in the office have used the services really, really useful and really helpful. So thank you for that. Just in terms of questions, then I was hoping to touch on two distinct areas. Firstly, on inflation, and then on the employment rates as well. Just around inflation, and it's been really useful to already hear some of those statistics as well. What are then the projected? What is the projection for inflation by the end of this year? And then in terms of what we can expect to fall, what's coming first? And that is it going to be food? Is it going to be utilities? Is it going to be fuel? What are the projections in and around that?
Okay, so in terms of the projection for the headline rate, I think the most recent projection from the Bank of England, the Bank of England manage the interest rate and have overall responsibility for trying to control inflation and bring it down. They had recently talked about trying to bring it down to 2%, the 2% target this year. I think the latest is that that's now probably more likely next year, into 2025. That projection changes every month, so it's based on what's happened most recently. So the rate that it's at is 4% at the minute. It was 4% the month before as well. So the last 4 or 5 months, it's been on a fairly steady downward trend. The flat kind of 4% to 4% release of data was actually a bit of a surprise. So that's had a knock-on effect then to what it means for how long it's going to take for inflation to fall. So that might be a consequence of, you know, inflation being more embedded than originally thought. So it's hard to say with any real precision when it's actually going to fall back to 2%. But the latest that I'm aware of was that it's pushed out slightly now towards closer to next year. In terms of the components, again, it's hard to say which one is going to fall first. Different components will have different impacts. So some components of inflation obviously are weighted higher because they make up more of the kind of basket of goods that make up inflation. So if more people, say, buy, I don't know, home heating oil, then that's going to have more of an effect because it's a bigger portion of the basket. So it's hard to say with any certainty again, unfortunately, which one is likely to fall first. Just that there are certain elements of it that if they fall, they'll have a outsized impact on inflation than, say, something much smaller, if that makes sense, if that sort of answers your question.
Okay, perfect. Look, thanks for that. And then the other thing was just on around employment rates as well. Have there been any research? And so there was a huge decrease, a sharp fall off really in the number of people who were self-employed since the pandemic. So is there any indication under that as to where are they going? You know, are they economically inactive? Have they become employees? Where are those people migrating to in terms of employment?
Yeah, so a lot of the change, there's one of the figures in the paper that shows how total employment is composed, so which I think you're referencing. So employment has gone up quite a lot, and that is largely a consequence of people leaving self-employment and changing labour market status and becoming employed. Obviously, there's more, I suppose, security with having an employee, you know, being an employee than there is being self-employed. And that was a really noticeable trend following the pandemic. Self-employment was fairly steady over time, and then took like quite a sharp decrease following the pandemic. In terms of the actual flow of whether people have become self-employed and gone to employment, or if they've become inactive or unemployed, isn't something I'd have to hand. It's not something we covered in the paper, but it is something that's possible to ascertain from the statistics. The NI Stats and Research Agency do publish things to do with what's called claimant flows. So when people are, you know, starting to claim unemployment benefits and when they're not, and when they move labour market status, which direction they're going in. So that is something that can be found out, but it's not something I'm afraid we've covered here.
Well, that's great. It'd be really useful, I think, to get that information just to pick up on trends and to actually ascertain better where people are going and where they're migrating to in terms of their employment. Look, thank you for the answers today. I really appreciate that.
Patrick, Mike.
Thank you very much. You're both very welcome. As you know, Eileen, I'm a bit of a fanboy of your work, and I hope Cass is coming back. Chris, I focused on economic inactivity and the reasons why. So, for example, I have heard an official of the department say, but economic inactivity includes students who are staying in education for longer, and that's a good thing. But I think overall economic inactivity is a bad thing. And what I'm wondering is, because our rates are so much worse than neighbouring jurisdictions, how well do we understand the reasons for economic inactivity?
It's not an area that's for want of research into it in Northern Ireland. There is quite a lot of work that's been done into it, and I think, you know, despite all that, it hasn't really changed too much over time. So I think there is quite a lot of work that's been done to identify not just that the headline rate's too high, but, you know, the reasons for why it is, the age groups and so on. So we can actually, you know, see in quite a lot of detail which cohorts of the inactive are the ones that we can actually do something about, or we can have some sort of impact on. You know, people over 50, for example, or that cohort that's long-term sick and disabled. I do feel like the reasons are fairly well understood. You know, like I say, a lot of work's been done to identify them, but I suppose coming up with policies to actually make a sort of substantial or significant impact on them is a different thing. Because the student point you made, you know, yes, that's classed as inactivity. I suppose it's considered inactivity, but it is also, I suppose, considered future potential economic activity. Similarly with retirement, you know, that's considered inactivity as well, but that's inactivity that has, or activity that has happened at some point as well.
I suppose what I'm wondering is if we look at some of the barriers to economic activity, such as affordable, accessible childcare, is it possible to say if we were able to deliver affordable, accessible childcare, we would have this impact, either in percentage terms or in numbers, on those who are currently economically inactive because of the lack of same?
Yeah, there's certainly a way, you know, if policies like that are costed, that there would be, you know, some sort of modelling involved in, you know, different scenarios of, say, you know, if childcare provision was a certain amount, that it would bring, you know, X amount into the workforce, or, you know, make it possible or remove some sort of barrier. I'm not aware of any estimate at the moment that actually says, you know, it would have a certain percentage impact, or, you know, bring a certain number of people back into the workforce.
Chair, I would just add that there is a very rich evidence base, but I guess it begs the question about when have we last had an executive economic strategy, overarching strategy, under which you would have departmental policies and programs falling out of. When have we last had program for government? So I guess asking the departmental officials, not just of economy, across the board, as to what plans there are for joined up activity to address all the metrics that Chris has spoken about, and not just in terms of an economic overarching strategy, also in relation to an industrial strategy and an investment strategy. So it's like looking at the totality of the equation rather than piecemeal.
And it's cross-cutting across all the government. Chair, I just wonder whether the committee would see value in asking research to take a look at economic inactivity and maybe pull that rich source of data together in terms of the possibilities of policies that the executive could bring forward that might make a dent in economic inactivity levels. Would that be something you could do if we agreed to ask?
Chair, we can outline and bring together all the information, but we wouldn't make policy proposals, but we can raise issues that arise out of and where there's apparent absences.
Yeah, where we can develop options. Would you
be happy to, and I think Philip wants to add to that point.
I was going to make the point, I mean, because Chris touched on carers and disability. So in terms of the research that Mike is suggesting we ask for, can I ask, I mean, because there's legislation that's come in through the EU and in the South, maybe about having the impact of that with regard to, you know, carers leaving and work-life balance as well, that be included in the research?
Okay, Mike, do you have any other questions? No,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you very much, and look forward to working with you as we go forward. I have a little bit of an issue with the terms that has been framed. The UK average growth was 41%, and our growth was 38%, which is below average. And the UK is an average economy. It's not even one of the best performing economies in the world by far. So because we're comparing ourselves to less than average, we're now saying we're performing well. But within the UK, we're performing, keeping up with average, just. But in the world market, we're not performing well. So the language that we use in reports like this are vital. And I'm a glass always half full, and want positivity, and want to move forward, and want to grow. But when you're starting base, you've got to be honest. And the starting base saying performing well, Northern Ireland economy, in my view, has not performed well over that period of time. Is that fair?
Yeah, in a lot of metrics, yeah, like that's a headline number. So GDP is, you know, an imperfect measure of how an economy is doing, but it's sort of a broad one to say how it's generally tracking because it's comparable with other economies. There are sort of, you know, within the detail areas where it is performing well and areas where it's performing less well, and that is sort of intended as like a, you know, a sort of general comparison with other similar sort of nearby countries, nearby economies. It's not performed quite as well, say, as the UK on average. The point is sort of trying to say that it's kept pace with it, despite sort of sectoral differences and productivity gaps and inactivity and things like that. But
Totally appreciate that. I totally appreciate that we are sort of roughly there around Scotland, Wales. I think we're a couple of percent higher from reading back, and that's fine. But you only have to look to the south, and if you quickly look at the World Bank figures, and the GDP in the south is 5 times what it was in 98 or 2000. I think the figures go back to. If you take out the blue chip companies and that sort of inward investment that's come into the south, their GDP per capita is over 3 times. The UK isn't even twice. But that's the report. We're basing ourselves only on England, Scotland, Wales, and saying we're performing well. Yeah, in reality, we're not. We're absolutely not. And we all want to, and we had a debate yesterday, and it was really useful where all of us were talking of the same, of wanting to move and go forward. But I think there has to be a level of honesty when we get reports through, not just within the UK regions, and I think that's important that we do have that, but also look to the south and the other European and the States, and of where we sit, because we don't compete economically within GB. We sit in the world market, and we need to sit in the world market. And if we don't have those sort of stats, then we don't. You know, we're starting from a base of, you know, pat ourselves on the back, and we're doing all right. But doing all right's not good enough, and that's the point I'm trying to make. You know, I want to see us grow and go, but doing okay and performing well when we're not. You know, we don't need a pat on the back. We need reality to move forward.
Chair, if I may suggest, when doing a future briefing, maybe to pull out other relevant comparators in the world market rather than just within the UK.
Absolutely essential. Totally essential. Yeah. You know,
that's doable.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sinead.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for that breakdown, and Eileen as well. The briefing rightly talks about inclusion, and it talked about the disparity in the economic rates. Given the priority given by the Minister in relation to regional balance, should we not have more data that actually drills down on each one of those areas? For example, economic inactivity, productivity gap. Should we get data about wage differentiation and disposable income? Because those figures really drill down on just where wealth is, where growth is, and where the need is. And we don't see that in this data. And I think it's really essential if the vision is going to be about good jobs and about regional balance, then we need the regional data, and we need it broken down very distinctly so that we can see the differentiations. And you know, those productivity gap that you've indicated there, there's great divergence in the productivity gap between parts of Northern Ireland. So that median does not tell the story. It does not tell the story at all. And you know, we talked all yesterday about apprenticeships. And things like that you know, drive productivity, and skills drives productivity. So we need to actually see where the gaps are, because then we'll know where the skills gaps are as well. Yeah. So I think it's really important for this, and I would absolutely agree with David. If we just keep on looking at the UK, you know, we're not really seeing the ambition that we need within the context of us in the Economic Committee, and we need to actually look at our nearest neighbour. In all of these areas, just to see where there is the differentiation, because we are competing in an all-island market as well as collaborating. Okay.
Chair, now that we have a sense of the new committee's senses and sensibilities, we will definitely bear that in mind when compiling the future briefings. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. And it's just a point on labour force. So obviously there's huge challenges there. Whenever we look at some of our major employers in Northern Ireland, they're very labour intensive industries. So there's a concern there regarding how do we address those issues in the future, given historic falling birth rates, and has that been factored in as to how we can ensure that we address economic inactivity by also recognising the huge challenges that the labour force is going to face in the projected future. But that being said as well, I was recently at an event where a major IT firm, global IT firm, said we are now at peak employment. And they meant by peak employment in terms of the technologies now that artificial intelligence have generated in that particular sector means that the creation of new jobs within that industry, in particular their own firm, has capped out. They will now be looking towards artificial intelligence to take up those particular roles. So there's two challenges there. One, key sectors that are going to require labour, which we look at historic low unemployment rates, one issue, and then the other issue, historic falling birth rates, which means they're not going to be able to fill those industries, and then on the alternative, new emerging technologies. Is there any analysis of what that future mapping out and planning looks like? Where does Northern Ireland sit within that, within the UK context, and then on a more UK basis on the global context, the challenges?
Yeah, not that I am aware of that I would have to hand. There probably is. There's a lot of work that's been done on the likely replacement of jobs with AI and automation and so on, and there has been some work done on that in Northern Ireland. It's looked at what the effect has been so far, but also jobs that are, I suppose potentially at risk of being replaced as well. So there is research that's on that.
Within the UK context, I'd love to know where Northern Ireland sits in comparison with other devolved regions in relation to the advancement of AI technologies to some of those work streams.
Chair, we again, it's another briefing that we could pursue, and we could call on our interparliamentary networks to see, because AI is, the debate and the outworkings of that is alive and well with. So we can try to capture that in a briefing.
Yeah, I would love to see actually how it interrelates with the public sector in particular. There is a lot of administrative duties, and in particular looking at whether it's challenges that our health service face in terms of some of the backlogs and delays right across different areas of the public sector, how AI interrelates with that in terms of trying to speed the system up, and are we behind in terms of other aspects of the UK in trying to achieve that goal? Just a point of view.
Yep, perfect. Just two quick questions from me. Figure 5 from your report, Northern Ireland exports, imports, trade balance 2011-22. So record trade exports Northern Ireland doesn't break down by market, but I assume UK internal market is still by far our largest export.
Yeah, if you look at the different components of imports and exports, so if you look at exports, around 55-60% of that is to GB. 22% is ROI. If you look in the other direction at imports, it's around 57 from GB, 57% of the total. That was around 70% 13 years ago. Around 2011 it was about 70%, it's now 57-60%. And then imports from ROI account for around 15%.
Thank you. And then just pick up on the point Sinead made in relation to most and least deprived wards in terms of employment. Do we go down into those? So that's figure 13 of your presentation. Do we use super output areas, council wards, parliamentary constituencies?
In this particular paper, it's economy-wide, but the data does exist at wards and super output area. So, in terms of deprivation, like all these metrics, inclusion metrics, deprivation, differences in employment rates, inactivity. Obviously, there's pockets of small, like you say, super output areas where it's much higher. So it's not uniform across Northern Ireland. An inactivity rate of 27% doesn't mean it's that everywhere. Obviously, it's some places it's much higher, but they're not in this paper in particular. But that data does exist, and Israel do publish it, and it is accessible. Yeah, so that can be looked at.
With that, Chris and Eileen, can I thank you both very much for your attendance. As members have articulated, your work is vital to the operation of the Assembly, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so in summary then, Chair, in terms of the research
Yes.
requests, there's a few, and this always happens when bids come to us, is around employment and where, as the project was asking about, where the self-employed go around inactivity, returning to work and becoming claimants, around inactivity and barriers to getting into employment. There's a piece then, which the Chair mentioned, around the sub-regional and the super output areas. I mean, some of them will definitely be in Belfast.
Yeah.
They definitely will. Old Park, others, for example, and some will be in the northwest. By the May, Chantal, Strabane, etc. Certainly would have been in the past. So there's a piece around that, so further information about that. And also we're looking for the paper to talk about the impact of childcare policies, particularly in other jurisdictions, because these issues have been tackled elsewhere. And then as Philip was asking about the impact on carers, their return to the workforce and measures that have been taken in order to help them manage their work-life balance and their caring responsibilities.
I mean, there's legislation in the south and there's a directive from the EU, so maybe just the impact of that we could learn from.
And I can recall when I was Social Development Committee clerk many years ago, the estimated impact of the economic benefit of carers, if you had to pay for them, it would be a couple of billion in Northern Ireland alone. The other points were around comparators for the economy with other jurisdictions. And then there was a piece around the sub-regional information about wage differentiation and productivity. And then the question Mr. Buckley asked about key sectors, the impact of AI, the challenge for Northern Ireland, and those particular sectors that are going to require investment that will be maybe the centres for employment or may be impacted adversely by employment going forward. And then furthermore, the breakdown of the trade information at figure 5, just the GB ROI for the imports and exports, just to see what that is. Just be interesting. So that's a bit that will keep them going for a while. But no, it's all good stuff, and no members should definitely ask Reyes for info. I would highly recommend it.
Everyone content with that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. If we then turn to item 10, members, which is correspondence. So page 854 to 857 of our packs provides a summary of all the correspondence that we're now going to deal with. So item 2 is at page 858. Members are asked to note a short acknowledgement from the department indicating that it will keep the committee abreast of employment rights issues. Is the committee content to note the correspondence?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Item 3 is at page 861. Members are asked to note the consultation on miscarriage leave pay has concluded and consideration of the responses is underway. The clerk has advised that the department erroneously included an incomplete analysis of the responses. Is the committee content to forego sight of the incomplete analysis on the strict understanding that the department shares the analysis when complete and advises the committee on the way forward for this important legislation?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Item 4 then is at page 863. Members are asked to note departmental correspondence advising that the Minister intends to bring forward legislation including a carers leave provision in this mandate. Is the committee content to note the correspondence, forward it to Carers NI and ask them to provide a briefing on this issue?
Yes.
That goes to what I was saying.
Yep. Item 5 then is at page 865. Members are asked to consider a departmental response to committee queries regarding a tuition fee consultation which was mandated by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. As part of a wider consideration of revenue raising measures, the consultation was not held. The consultation documentation includes quite a lot of information about maximum student numbers and widening participation, which has been summarised in the index by the clerk. Is the committee content to write to the department and ask for details of the timeline in terms of reference of the review of HE funding, an explanation of the application of the mezzanine formula for HE and FE, information on the level of widening participation funding generated by non-UK students, and clarity as to whether the Department for Health provides tuition fee cover for allied health professional HE courses as per page 893 of your pack.
Can I
Yeah, of
ask
course,
a question? It appears that from the consultation that the department hasn't considered the postgraduate tuition fees, as they're kind of unregulated, but we all know that the loan is less than the cost that it takes. Can we ask the department to give consideration for this in this document as well?
Sorry, you were writing to the department asking them to consider
just that the department's consultation from this doesn't appear to be considering postgrad.
The consultation was not run. It was mandated by the Secretary of State, so there will be no consultation.
Or, I mean, the paper itself, this document, sorry, beg your pardon, the paper. So to look at the postgraduate situation in terms of the tuition fees, because it doesn't cover the costs.
The loan doesn't cover the tuition fee, is what the member's saying?
Yes, it's unregulated. Yeah.
Okay. No problem. Is that agreed, Chairperson, to write to the department?
Yeah, and then the other just bit around this as well is, can we get an assessment on what an increase on any fees for students would mean, and what would it cost if we were releasing a mass in place? What would that actually cost? In terms of a tuition fee, what would that actually put on the student if we were actually costing that all out? Because there doesn't seem to be any really clarity around that as well. So we keep on talking about raising tuition fees, but what would the department need in order to release one place? So per place, if you know what I mean.
It's £1 million for 180 undergraduate students at UU and QUB, according to that document.
No, but can we get the breakdown? I just don't understand where it all, where they're getting their figures for.
Calculated, is that agreed, Chairperson?
Because that it's very prohibitive. If you look at it in that kind of round, it's very prohibitive. So if they could give a breakdown, sorry.
What do you think?
Mr. Delargy?
I think you've clarified it, Clerk, already, but I think what is important to state on that is that it's not the desire of the Economy Minister to raise tuition fees in any form. That was obviously something that the consultation came out under the Secretary of State. So, look, I mean, the concerns that have already been raised, would totally share them. Don't think that we should be looking at that at all. So I think we need to just assess the fact that the consultation hasn't happened. It hasn't happened because it was mandated by the Secretary of State. The minister's come on clearly now and said it shouldn't. That we're not looking at that. So I think it's just clear that we now have a minister in place, that the consultation hasn't gone ahead, and we need to kind of look at that angle of it.
No, and I'm not suggesting the increasing of student fees either, but I just want to know what is the considerations, what would the cost be, because I want to break it down so that we have an argument against raising it, just in terms of the prohibitive cost there. So it's just kind of understanding the data behind it, if you know what I mean.
Are members content? Anyone else on that point, or any other point on those? So they're all agreed? Yep, perfect. Okay. Item 6, members, is a page 951. Members are asked to note response from the Committee for Finance around industrial derating. So members will be aware that the Minister for Finance has confirmed the continuation of industrial derating. Item 7, a page 953. Members are asked to note a copy of a written ministerial statement in respect of regional rate, where the Minister of Finance indicates that industrial derating measures are set to continue. Are members content to note that statement? Thank you. Item 8, a page 957. Members are asked to consider a response to committee queries in respect of unpublished Department for the Economy Annual Report and Accounts 2022 to 23 and the anticipated departmental financial outturn for 23-24. The Clerk has summarised key information in the index, including a 2022-23 capital budget underspent of nearly £25 million, of which 4 was apparently returned to Treasury. AME underspend, including £25 million of underutilisation of Invest NI grant provision, and in 2023-24 a projected capital slippage of £24 million owing to city deals, which members have raised previously. Are the members content to note these issues for now and perhaps ask the Minister about them when he briefs us in the week after next?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 9 then, members, is page 968. Members are asked to note the February update on the department's capital projects. Are the department are we happy to note those?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 10 is page 972. Members are asked to note a response from the Minister indicating his concerns and the way forward for the ETA authorisation scheme. Is the committee content to note the correspondence? Thank you. Thank you. Item 11 is a page 974. Members are asked to note correspondence from the department providing an update on the review of the Labour Relations Agency. A final report is to be published. The department also advises of reviews of the 6 FE colleges, Stranmillis and the Health and Safety Executive, Northern Ireland. These were instigated following NDNA commitment to review arm's length bodies. Is the committee content to write to the department to seek sight of these relevant reports when they are published?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 12, members, is at page 977. Members are asked to note a departmental response on the late payment framework. Is the committee content to note the report? Thank you. Item 13, members, at page 979, we're asked to note the second report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. The ESR has no comment on any rule considered by our committee. Is we therefore content to note that report?
Yeah.
Thank you. Page 988 is item 14, and members are asked to consider an invitation from the NUSUSI to meet with the chair to discuss issues in higher education. Members content that I meet with them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Item 15 is at page 898. Members are asked to note correspondence from the Association of British Insurers. Are we content to note those correspondence?
Chair, just on that, happy to note, and obviously it's very, very timely. Anybody that has had interaction or had constituents with interaction with insurers, it's a huge problem, and it's maybe something that the committee might want to look at in further detail, because it's having a particular impact on not only we look at our economic inactivity and productivity rates. This is having a huge impact on those younger people that are trying to access the workplace, particularly those from a rural perspective that don't have the access to public transport. So it would be timely for us to maybe delve a wee bit further into that at a particular point.
Briefing from the Association of British Insurers.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Members happy to do that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Page 992 then, members, item 16. Members are asked to note correspondence from the Maritime Belfast Trust to the Minister regarding the Belfast Waterfront Promenade Framework. Is the committee content to note those correspondence?
Yeah.
Do any members have any queries with those correspondence? No. Forward work plan then, item 11. That's at page 995. Are members content with the forward work plan as currently set out?
Mr. Nesbitt.
Mike?
Yeah, just looking at the 20th of March ministerial briefing budget, I take it it's more than the budget. We've got a kind of...
We've asked him, so the chair wrote to the Minister seeking a briefing. We have asked, so the committee has asked for what's the Minister's plan for the mandate. But they've only undertaken to provide information on the budget. But I said to them I would be astonished if members didn't ask lots and lots of questions about what the Minister, now that he's got his feet under the table, what his plans are for the remainder of the mandate. And there we are.
I think it's a little unusual to go 6 meetings before the Minister appears before committee.
I think in fairness, and it's not for me to defend the Minister on this one, but obviously he will be in, I think he was hoping to come next week, but he's in the United States in relation to St. Patrick's Day. But I am sure the Minister will be well aware that the committee will want to raise a broad range of issues with him on his return, and I'm sure should anyone be speaking to the Minister between now and the 20th, just to flag with him that we'll be keen to look at it.
He's probably listening in, sure.
I'm sure he has.
Watch him and thousands of others.
Yeah.
So it's a very popular committee.
There are some broad issues. I mean, we've had kind of in the Legacy Committee some piecemeal legislation on employment, like parental bereavement and carers. And I think even the Minister's hinted that he's thinking about a more overarching piece of employment legislation. Yesterday he sponsored a trade union launch of a document which is about a kind of tripartite social inclusion approach, which I think is very interesting. So these are areas that we have a duty to explore with them.
Okay.
Noted.
Yeah, noted. Yep. Are people happy to approve the forward work plan?
Yep.
Perfect. Any other business at this stage, members, for the committee? If not, then members, the next committee is scheduled for Wednesday the 13th of March at 10 a.m. here in room 30 at Parliament Buildings, and our members content. Sorry.
Just advanced apologies, I'll not be here.
You can speak to the Minister in the United States
will.
on our behalf. Are the committee agreed that we do now adjourn?
Yeah.
Committee.
Committee Room 30, sound.